You're lucky to have a job. That's what Stephen Mitchell said on January 15, 2025 at 10:47 a.m. in his office at Mitchell Construction Services, smirking while he rejected my request for a salary adjustment from $48,000 to $62,000 to match market rates for construction project managers with my qualifications and experience. His tone suggesting that I should be grateful for employment rather than expecting compensation that reflected 3 years of managing projects worth $18 million in total contract value with zero safety incidents, zero cost overruns, and zero schedule delays. The morning sunlight through his window illuminated the framed photos on his walls, completed projects I'd managed, safety awards I'd earned, client testimonials praising work I'd coordinated, while I stood holding a folder containing documentation that Stephen's construction company had been systematically violating Davis-Bacon Act prevailing wage requirements on federal construction contracts for the past 2 years, underpaying workers by approximately $340,000 in total wages owed, and falsifying certified payroll reports submitted to federal contracting officers to conceal the wage violations. I'd been project manager at Mitchell Construction Services for 3 years, 2 months, and 8 days, responsible for managing federal and state construction projects including VA hospital renovations, post office repairs, and federal building maintenance contracts that required compliance with prevailing wage laws, certified payroll reporting, and labor standards that protected construction workers from contractors who cut costs by paying below legally required wages, and Stephen, who'd inherited the company from his father and had been running it for 6 years with a business degree and zero understanding of the complex labor regulations governing federal construction contracts, had decided that my request for market rate compensation was evidence of entitlement rather than recognition that I was significantly underpaid for managing projects that generated $6 million annually in revenue while maintaining perfect compliance on contracts where violations could result in debarment from federal work. I'm Rachel Cooper, and I stood in that office knowing exactly what the Davis-Bacon Act required, that contractors performing federal construction work must pay workers prevailing wages determined by the Department of Labor for each job classification and geographic area, must submit weekly certified payroll reports documenting wages paid, and must maintain records proving compliance that could be audited by federal contracting officers or Department of Labor investigators, and knowing that the documentation I'd compiled over 6 months showed that Mitchell Construction had been paying laborers $18 to $22 per hour on federal projects where the prevailing wage was $28 to $32 per hour, had been submitting certified payroll reports falsely claiming workers were paid prevailing wages, and had been pocketing the difference between what should have been paid and what was actually paid as additional profit margin. 3 years, 2 months, and 8 days of managing federal construction contracts properly, ensuring workers were paid correctly, submitting accurate certified payroll reports, and maintaining the labor compliance that federal contracts explicitly required. And Stephen had decided that my request for a $14,000 salary increase after 3 years of zero raises was unreasonable while he was stealing $340,000 from construction workers and defrauding the federal government through falsified wage reporting. I wasn't the chief operating officer who bid on contracts and managed company finances, or the VP of operations who oversaw multiple project sites and coordinated with subcontractors. I drove a 2019 Ford F-150 with 98,472 miles and a truck bed containing construction drawings, inspection reports, and project documentation I transported between sites because managing federal construction meant being on site to verify work quality and labor compliance rather than managing from an office. I lived in a 650-square-foot apartment with a home office containing binders of Davis-Bacon wage determinations, certified payroll templates, federal acquisition regulations, and the extensive documentation required for federal construction projects that most contractors found burdensome but that I understood were essential protections ensuring construction workers received fair wages. I was methodical about compliance documentation, careful about wage calculations, and protective of worker rights under federal labor standards, and apparently Stephen thought these characteristics made me someone who should be lucky to have a job rather than the person whose compliance expertise is the only thing preventing this company from federal debarment and criminal prosecution for wage theft and fraud. I joined Mitchell Construction Services in November 2021 as an assistant project manager when they were a mid-sized construction contractor specializing in commercial renovations and government facility maintenance. The company employed 47 workers including project managers, skilled tradespeople, and laborers, and generated approximately $12 million in annual revenue with roughly 40% coming from federal and state government contracts. Federal construction contracts work for agencies like the Department of Veterans Affairs, General Services Administration, and Department of Defense, offer stable revenue and reliable payment but come with extensive regulatory requirements. The most significant is the Davis-Bacon Act, which requires contractors on federal construction projects to pay workers prevailing wages determined by the Department of Labor based on local wage surveys for each craft and geographic area. Prevailing wages are typically higher than market rates because they're based on union scale wages in the area. For example, in our region, the prevailing wage for a construction laborer on federal projects was $28 to $32 per hour depending on classification, while market rates for similar non-union labor were $18 to $22 per hour. This wage premium is intentional. It prevents contractors from winning federal contracts by undercutting competitors through below-market wages and ensures that federal construction supports decent working-class wages. Contractors must submit weekly certified payroll reports to the contracting agency documenting that each worker was paid at least the prevailing wage for their job classification. These reports are signed under penalty of perjury, and falsifying them is a federal crime. Violations can result in back wage payments, liquidated damages, debarment from federal contracts, and criminal prosecution. My role as assistant project manager, promoted to project manager in 2022, was to manage day-to-day construction activities including coordinating workers, ensuring quality standards, maintaining safety compliance, and handling the extensive documentation federal contracts required. This included preparing and submitting certified payroll reports showing that workers were paid prevailing wages. For the first 18 months, Mitchell Construction complied with Davis-Bacon requirements. We paid prevailing wages on federal projects, submitted accurate certified payroll, and absorbed the higher labor costs as part of our bid pricing on federal work. Federal projects had lower profit margins than commercial work because of prevailing wage requirements, but they provided steady revenue and enhanced our reputation for handling regulated work. This changed in mid-2023 when federal contract revenue increased to nearly 50% of total revenue. Stephen began pressuring project managers to optimize labor costs and find efficiencies in how we managed federal projects. In July 2023, Stephen called a meeting with project managers to discuss labor cost management strategies. Our federal work is growing, but margins are thin because of prevailing wage requirements, Stephen explained. We need to be smarter about how we classify workers and how we manage labor costs. There's flexibility in how we interpret job classifications and wage determinations. I asked what he meant by flexibility. Prevailing wage determinations have multiple classifications with different wage rates, Stephen said. A laborer doing basic cleanup has a lower prevailing wage than a skilled laborer operating equipment. We should classify workers at the lowest appropriate level rather than defaulting to higher classifications. This seemed reasonable in principle. Properly classifying workers according to actual duties performed was legitimate. But Stephen's next comment revealed his actual intent. And honestly, most of our workers are happy to receive straight-time pay rather than dealing with the paperwork complexity of prevailing wage calculations. What they don't know about prevailing wage requirements won't hurt them. We'll continue paying our standard wages. And handle the certified payroll documentation to show compliance. I spoke up immediately. That's wage theft and certified payroll fraud. We're legally required to pay prevailing wages on federal projects regardless of whether workers know about the requirement. And falsifying certified payroll reports is a federal crime. Stephen waved dismissively. Rachel, you're interpreting regulations too literally. Every contractor finds ways to manage labor costs on federal projects. The government sets unrealistic wage requirements, and we'd lose money on every federal contract if we actually paid those inflated rates. This is standard industry practice. It's not standard practice, it's illegal, I replied. The Davis-Bacon Act explicitly requires paying prevailing wages and accurately reporting them. Violating that requirement creates criminal and civil liability. Let me worry about legal liability, Stephen said. Your job is to manage projects efficiently. If I'm telling you that we're going to pay standard wages on federal projects rather than inflated prevailing wages, that's a business decision I'm making as owner. You'll prepare certified payroll showing prevailing wages were paid, and we'll handle the actual wage payments through our standard payroll system. I won't prepare false certified payroll reports, I said. That requires my signature certifying accuracy under penalty of perjury. I'm not signing false statements. Then I'll have accounting prepare the certified payroll, Stephen replied. You'll focus on managing construction activities. From August 2023 forward, Mitchell Construction implemented systematic wage theft on federal contracts. Workers were paid Mitchell's standard wages, $18-22 per hour for laborers, $25 to $30 per hour for skilled trades, while certified payroll reports submitted to federal agencies falsely claimed workers were paid prevailing wages of $28 to $32 per hour for laborers and $38 to $45 per hour for skilled trades. The difference between what should have been paid and what was actually paid went directly to Mitchell's profit margin. On a typical federal project with 20 workers over 3 months, this wage theft generated approximately $85,000 in additional profit. I was removed from certified payroll preparation and told to focus on construction management rather than administrative compliance. But I continued documenting what was happening because I understood that when federal investigators eventually discovered the fraud, having detailed records would be essential. I documented actual wages paid to workers from conversations with workers and observation of payment patterns, certified payroll reports submitted to federal agencies showing false prevailing wages, the discrepancy between reported and actual wages, conversations where Stephen explicitly directed falsification of wage reports, and projects where wage theft occurred with dates, contract numbers, and estimated amounts stolen. By January 2025, I'd documented wage theft totaling approximately $340,000 across 11 federal construction contracts over 18 months. This included the VA hospital renovation project where $67,000 in prevailing wages went unpaid, post office repair contracts with $48,000 in unpaid wages, federal building maintenance where $112,000 was stolen from workers, and GSA facility renovations accounting for $113,000 in wage theft. Each instance of wage theft was documented with project details, worker classifications, prevailing wage rates that should have been paid, actual wages paid, and the difference representing stolen wages. I also documented that certified payroll reports for these projects contained false wage information, constituting fraud against the federal government. Throughout 2024, I raised concerns about this practice. I sent emails to Stephen explaining that wage theft and certified payroll fraud created substantial legal liability. I warned that Department of Labor investigations of Davis-Bacon violations resulted in severe penalties including debarment. I recommended immediately correcting wage payments and disclosing the violations before they were discovered by investigators. Stephen's responses were consistent: "Your concerns are noted, but we're managing this appropriately. Focus on your project management responsibilities rather than questioning business decisions." In November 2024, I requested a meeting with Stephen to discuss my compensation. I'd received 0 salary increases since being hired in November 2021 at $48,000 annually. Market rate for construction project managers with my experience managing federal contracts was $62,000 to $72,000. I was being underpaid by approximately 29% compared to market rates. I prepared documentation showing comparable salaries, my project performance record, and the value I'd provided managing $18 million in projects over 3 years with perfect safety and compliance records, on projects where I still controlled compliance processes. Stephen reviewed my request for approximately 8 minutes before rejecting it. "Rachel, I appreciate your work, but I'm not comfortable with a $14,000 increase. The company's margins are tight. We can't afford significant compensation increases right now. The company's revenue has grown by 40% over 3 years, I said. Federal contract volume has increased substantially. My project management has contributed directly to that growth. Market rates for project managers with federal construction experience are $62,000 to $72,000. I'm asking for the lower end of market range. You're comparing yourself to project managers at larger firms with different cost structures, Stephen replied. Mitchell is a smaller company. We pay what we can afford. Frankly, you're lucky to have a job in a competitive market. Lots of construction workers are struggling to find employment. You have stable work, consistent hours, and reasonable compensation. I'd suggest being grateful for what you have rather than demanding more. I sat there processing the fact that Stephen had just told me I was lucky to have a job while his company was stealing $340,000 from construction workers and I was being paid 29% below market rate for managing the federal contracts that generated the revenue paying his salary. I'm not lucky to have a job, I said quietly. I'm a qualified professional providing valuable services. I'm requesting market rate compensation. If you're unwilling to pay market rates, I'll need to consider other opportunities. That's your choice, Stephen said with a smirk. But I think you'll find that other construction companies have similar constraints. The industry doesn't pay as well as you seem to think it should. I left his office knowing that I was done trying to work within Mitchell Construction's corrupt system. Now about 69% of you think I'm about to quit immediately and anonymously report the wage theft to federal investigators as revenge for being called lucky to have a job, and you're partially right about reporting but wrong about the anonymous part. Subscribe right now, because what actually happens is that I file a formal complaint with the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division using my real name as a current employee exercising whistleblower protections. I provide comprehensive documentation of the wage theft and certified payroll fraud, and 1 week after Stephen smirks that I'm lucky to have a job, he receives a phone call from a Department of Labor investigator informing him that Mitchell Construction is under investigation for Davis-Bacon Act violations, and my detailed documentation becomes the evidence that results in $680,000 in back wages and liquidated damages, debarment from federal contracts for 3 years, and criminal referral to the Department of Justice for certified payroll fraud. I didn't quit. I didn't report anonymously. Instead, on January 16, 2025, 1 day after Stephen told me I was lucky to have a job, I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. The complaint was detailed and comprehensive. It identified Mitchell Construction Services and Stephen Mitchell as owner, described the systematic wage theft on federal construction contracts, specified projects with contract numbers, dates, and locations, documented actual wages paid versus prevailing wages required, included copies of certified payroll reports containing false wage information, provided calculations showing total underpayment of approximately $340,000, presented evidence of my repeated warnings to Stephen about the violations, and stated that I was filing as a current employee exercising rights under whistleblower protection statutes. I attached 6 months of documentation, wage comparisons, certified payroll reports, project records, emails warning Stephen about violations, and detailed spreadsheets showing wage theft calculations for each project. I also filed a copy of the complaint with the Office of Inspector General for the contracting agencies whose projects were affected, the VA, GSA, and Department of Defense. Filing as a current employee rather than anonymously was strategically important. The Davis-Bacon Act and related whistleblower statutes protect employees from retaliation for reporting wage violations. Filing under my own name established my whistleblower status and made any subsequent adverse employment action presumptive retaliation. The Department of Labor confirmed receipt of my complaint on January 17 and assigned an investigator, Michael Torres, who called me on January 20. Ms. Cooper, I've reviewed your complaint and documentation. This appears to be systematic wage theft involving multiple federal contracts. I'm opening a formal investigation. I'll need to interview you, review Mitchell Construction's payroll records, and interview affected workers. The investigation will take several weeks. I'm still employed by Mitchell Construction, I said. I'm protected from retaliation under whistleblower statutes. Correct. If Mitchell takes any adverse action against you after this complaint, that would constitute illegal retaliation. Document any changes to your employment status. On January 22, 2025, exactly 1 week after Stephen had smirked that I was lucky to have a job, Michael Torres called Mitchell Construction. I wasn't present for the call, but Stephen's reaction was immediately visible. He emerged from his office looking shocked and angry, called an emergency meeting with accounting and project managers, and announced that the company was under Department of Labor investigation for alleged wage violations. Someone filed a complaint claiming we're not paying prevailing wages properly on federal contracts, Stephen said, his voice tight. This is completely unfounded. We have full documentation of wage compliance. But we'll need to cooperate with the investigation and provide records. He looked directly at me. Rachel, since you handle federal project documentation, I'll need you to compile payroll records for all federal projects over the past 2 years. I haven't handled certified payroll since August 2023, I replied. Accounting has been preparing those reports. You'll need to get records from them. Stephen's expression hardened. Why were you removed from certified payroll preparation? You removed me after I refused to prepare false wage reports. You said accounting would handle it. The room went silent. The other project managers now understood what was happening. Stephen ended the meeting abruptly. Over the next 3 weeks, Department of Labor investigators conducted a comprehensive investigation. They interviewed me extensively about my complaint and documentation, reviewed Mitchell Construction's payroll records and certified payroll reports, interviewed workers about actual wages received, compared reported wages to actual payment records, analyzed contracts to determine prevailing wage requirements, and calculated total underpayments across affected projects. The investigation confirmed every aspect of my complaint. Workers had been paid standard wages while certified payroll reports falsely claimed prevailing wages were paid. The systematic wage theft totaled $341,000 across 11 federal contracts. On February 12, 2025, the Department of Labor issued preliminary findings to Mitchell Construction, material violations of Davis-Bacon Act prevailing wage requirements on federal construction contracts. Back wages owed, $341,000. Liquidated damages, equal to back wages $341,000. Total liability, $682,000. Recommendation for debarment from federal contracts pending resolution. Referral to Department of Justice for criminal investigation of certified payroll fraud. Stephen called me to his office on February 13. Rachel, I need to ask you directly, did you file the Department of Labor complaint? Yes. I filed on January 16 documenting wage theft and certified payroll fraud that I'd warned you about repeatedly for 18 months. You've destroyed this company. 47 employees will lose their jobs because you couldn't handle being told no on a salary increase. 47 employees will lose their jobs because you stole $341,000 from construction workers and committed federal fraud, I replied. I documented violations. I warned you. You ignored the warnings and told me I was lucky to have a job when I requested market rate compensation. I filed a protected whistleblower complaint. What happens next is consequence of your decisions, not my reporting. You're fired, Stephen said. That's illegal retaliation, I replied calmly. I'm a protected whistleblower. Terminating me within a month of filing a DOL complaint is presumptive retaliation. You're creating additional federal liability. Stephen seemed to realize his mistake. You're not fired. But you're suspended pending investigation of whether you violated confidentiality by providing company records to federal investigators. There's no confidentiality in wage records, I said. Federal regulations require providing wage information to investigators. Suspending me for cooperating with a DOL investigation is also retaliation. I was suspended anyway. I immediately documented the retaliation and reported it to the Department of Labor investigator and to my attorney. My attorney, Jennifer Walsh, specialized in employment law and whistleblower cases. She sent a letter to Mitchell Construction on February 14. Ms. Cooper is a protected whistleblower under Davis-Bacon Act anti-retaliation provisions and related statutes. Her suspension following her DOL complaint constitutes illegal retaliation. Mitchell Construction must immediately reinstate Ms. Cooper to her position with full back pay and benefits. Failure to reinstate will result in additional legal action. Mitchell Construction didn't reinstate me. Instead, on February 20, they terminated my employment, claiming insubordination and unauthorized disclosure of confidential company information. Jennifer filed a wrongful termination and whistleblower retaliation lawsuit on February 25, 2025. Meanwhile, the Department of Labor's investigation concluded. On March 7, 2025, DOL issued final findings showing that Mitchell Construction violated Davis-Bacon Act on 11 federal contracts with total back wages owed of $341,000, liquidated damages of $341,000, administrative penalties of $25,000, total monetary liability of $707,000, debarment from federal contracting for 3 years, and referral to Department of Justice for criminal prosecution of certified payroll fraud. The debarment was particularly devastating. Mitchell Construction derived nearly 50% of revenue from federal contracts. Losing eligibility for federal work meant losing approximately $6 million in annual revenue. The company's bonding company, which provided payment and performance bonds required for federal contracts, terminated Mitchell's bonding capacity upon learning of the debarment. This made Mitchell unable to bid on large commercial projects that also required bonding. Several current federal projects were terminated by contracting officers who exercised contractual rights to terminate for cause based on Davis-Bacon violations. Mitchell Construction's revenue collapsed. By April 2025, the company was laying off workers and selling equipment to cover the $707,000 in back wages, damages, and penalties owed to DOL. Stephen Mitchell was personally charged by the Department of Justice on April 18, 2025 with making false statements on certified payroll reports, a federal crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. The charges alleged that Stephen had knowingly submitted false wage reports to federal agencies on 11 separate occasions, each count carrying up to 5 years imprisonment. Stephen pleaded guilty to one count in June 2025 in exchange for prosecutors dismissing the other counts. He was sentenced to 12 months in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, and ordered to pay $180,000 in restitution. My whistleblower retaliation lawsuit settled in May 2025. Mitchell Construction agreed to pay $240,000 to resolve my wrongful termination claim. The settlement included acknowledgement that my termination violated whistleblower protection statutes and that I had exercised protected rights by reporting wage violations. I was also contacted by 3 other construction companies who'd learned about my role in the Department of Labor investigation. All 3 were companies specializing in federal construction work who needed project managers with expertise in Davis-Bacon compliance and federal contracting regulations. I accepted a position as senior project manager at Federal Builders Group in June 2025. The role paid $88,000 annually, an 83% increase from my Mitchell salary, and included responsibility for managing Davis-Bacon compliance across the company's federal project portfolio. On July 15, 2025, I saw Stephen at the federal courthouse where he was reporting for his prison sentence. He was with his attorney, preparing to surrender to begin his 12-month term. He saw me in the courthouse hallway and approached. "Rachel, I hope you're satisfied. You destroyed a company that employed 47 people. You destroyed my career and my freedom. All because I wouldn't give you a raise." "I reported wage theft and federal fraud," I replied. "You stole $341,000 from construction workers who were legally entitled to prevailing wages." You submitted false certified payroll reports to federal agencies 11 times. You committed federal crimes for 18 months despite repeated warnings. I exercised my legal right to report violations. What destroyed your company and your freedom were your decisions, not my reporting. You could have handled it differently. You could have given me a chance to fix the problem before going to federal investigators. I gave you 18 months of chances. I sent emails warning about violations. I recommended correcting wage payments. I told you that Davis-Bacon violations resulted in severe penalties including debarment. You dismissed every warning, removed me from compliance responsibilities, and told me I was lucky to have a job when I asked for market rate compensation. You had countless opportunities to fix the problem. You chose continued fraud instead. The workers didn't even know they were owed higher wages, Stephen said. They were happy with what they were paid. This was a victimless technical violation. Wage theft is not victimless. Those workers were entitled to $341,000 in wages that you stole. The fact that they didn't know. Prevailing wage requirements doesn't make stealing from them acceptable. And falsifying certified payroll reports submitted to federal agencies isn't a technical violation, it's federal fraud. You certified under penalty of perjury that you'd paid prevailing wages when you hadn't. That's a crime. I made a business decision, Stephen insisted. You made a criminal decision, I corrected. Business decisions are choices within legal boundaries. Stealing wages and falsifying federal reports are crimes. You're going to federal prison because you decided that committing fraud was easier than paying legally required wages. That's not a business decision that went wrong, it's criminal conduct that had predictable consequences. Stephen walked into the courthouse to begin his sentence. Here's what they don't teach construction contractors about Davis-Bacon compliance. Prevailing wage requirements aren't suggestions to be circumvented, they're legal obligations enforced by federal investigators with debarment and criminal prosecution authority. Wage theft isn't a business decision to optimize labor costs, it's theft from workers and fraud against the government. And project managers who document violations aren't troublemakers to be dismissed, they're professionals exercising legal rights to report crimes. Stephen thought telling me I was lucky to have a job would end the conversation about fair compensation and make me grateful for employment at below-market wages while he stole from workers. What it actually did was confirm that I was working for someone who had no respect for either employee compensation or legal obligations, which made reporting his crimes the right professional decision. The math is simple. Mitchell Construction stole $341,000 from construction workers who were legally entitled to prevailing wages. Stephen submitted 11 false certified payroll reports to federal agencies. I documented the violations and reported them through proper channels exercising whistleblower protections. The Department of Labor investigation resulted in $707,000 in back wages, damages, and penalties. 3-year debarment cost Mitchell approximately $18 million in lost federal contract revenue. Stephen was sentenced to 12 months in federal prison and $180,000 in restitution. And I received $240,000 in wrongful termination settlement plus an 83% salary increase to a new role where compliance expertise is valued rather than dismissed. You want to tell employees they're lucky to have a job while committing federal crimes? Go ahead. But remember that employees who document those crimes and report them through proper channels are exercising protected legal rights, and that one phone call from a Department of Labor investigator can transform a smirking dismissal of compensation requests into federal investigation, debarment, criminal prosecution, and prison time. Stephen smirked that I was lucky to have a job. Department of Labor investigators determined I was a credible whistleblower with detailed documentation of systematic wage theft. Federal prosecutors determined Stephen committed 11 counts of certified payroll fraud. A federal judge determined 12 months imprisonment was appropriate for stealing $341,000 from construction workers while falsifying federal documents. I kept my F-150 with 98,472 miles. I kept my binders of Davis-Bacon wage determinations and federal compliance regulations. I kept the methodical approach to documentation that protected workers and exposed fraud. Stephen is serving federal prison time learning that wage theft and certified payroll fraud aren't business decisions, they're federal crimes with serious consequences. Mitchell Construction is bankrupt, unable to operate without federal contract eligibility that won't return for 3 years. And I'm managing federal construction projects at a company that understands compliance expertise is an asset rather than an obstacle. Lucky to have a job? Lucky to have documented systematic federal crimes before reporting them through proper channels. Lucky to have exercised whistleblower protections that prevented retaliation from succeeding. Lucky to have comprehensive evidence that federal investigators used to recover stolen wages and prosecute fraud. 1 week after being told I was lucky to have a job, one phone call from a federal investigator began the process that destroyed the company, ended a career, and resulted in federal imprisonment. Sometimes the person who's really lucky is the one who committed crimes and hasn't been caught yet, until someone with detailed documentation exercises their legal right to report violations and luck runs out completely. He said I was lucky to have a job, then luck ran out for him. Luck doesn't protect you from Department of Labor investigations. Luck doesn't prevent debarment when you steal wages. Luck doesn't keep you out of federal prison when you falsify certified payroll reports 11 times despite warnings from the project manager who documented every violation and reported them exactly as whistleblower protection laws intended.